the meeting. So if you want to have a chance to see this, you weren't able to attend live, this recording should be available, and you should be able to share it with colleagues if this is some information you want to pass along. I'm Mark McKell. I'll just be kind of moderating in the background. So if there are questions you want to raise or some discussion we can have around the topic of LTI migration, I'm sure there'll be some time at the end. And Claude, if you have a preference, and others who will be presenting, if we hold questions till the end or if we just discuss them as we go along, up to you.
I think we maybe we can do the presentation, and then when we are platform specific, we can take a few questions on a per platform basis. But since we try to do a very overview of all the platforms, we'll have to be careful not to allow every platform to have their little time. You know, so I think within 8 minutes each platform, we should be fine. So when we stay in that realm, that would be good.
Okay. And the rest of us will also be very active in the chat, and people are asking questions, so we'll be trying to answer them as they come in as well. So since we don't work, we'll probably be a little tight on time. Just we're happy to answer in chat as well.
All right, so with that, I'll pass it over to Claude, who will be starting off the discussion and then sharing what the rest of the agenda will look like. So thanks for being here, everyone.
Yes, hello, everybody. So yeah, so this presentation is mostly going to be about migration, and we might do some sneak peek on dynamic registration also. And we had a very interesting roundtable last Tuesday about dynamic registration. So if you end up lacking on dynamic registrations, go see the recording of that registration roundtable. But yes, today's the main focus is going to be on migration, and so I'm going to start with a few slides presenting the migration more from a specification viewpoint, so how it was expected to allow some migration paths, and then we're going to dive into the platforms. And thanks all the platforms present today here that going to do a little bit of an overview, and we'll have other roundtables with those platforms to go into more details in the future. But and we had some in the past already. So, but this is going to go for all of them. And again, if we're going to do a sneak peek at dynamic registration, if time allows at the end. So let's get started. Well, okay, so migration to LTI Advantage. So I label here, everything changes, yet nothing does. Because if you're implementing LTI Advantage, you're going to find that you're not going to reuse a lot of stuff that you had before in your implementation. But one thing you might actually reuse is your data model, or at least the data that you have around. Because if everything changes, the core data doesn't change. And the key here is that you don't need to rebuild your core. So when you move your tool from an LTI 1.1 to an LTI 1.3, you don't have to say you have to start from scratch. If you say that, that might be a choice, but it's not, you're not forced to do that. You can keep your links functional and have your links now move on 1.3, those links that were 1.1 before. And how is that? Well, the data is the same, it's more or less the same, the data being exchanged, but of course the transport is very different. So, so we're gonna see in those few slides, where did it go? How did it move from 1.1 to 1.3? So the very first element of data is the actual launch URL. And in LTI 1.1, when you were creating an LTI link, well, the launch URL was the URL where you were launching to. So you could very well put actually important information in the path or query parameters into this URL. And that could be very important for you to know which resource you would display. So that was LTI 1.1. But with LTI 1.3, the launch URL, you never launch as from a platform 2 anymore. It's never used to launch anymore. The only URLs that are launched from the platforms are the OpenID related URLs. That means the initiate login URLs and the authentication request URLs. The launch URL in itself is never launched to anymore. So how do you get it back? Well, you get it back through a parameter called the target link URI. And this parameter is passed to you on the two legs of the exchange. So in the first leg, which is the initiate login URI, is going to be passed to you as a parameter. And because it's just a parameter, it's not secured. It's just informational. So that tells you what used to be the launch URL. Now it's passed to you as a target link URI. And you might use this information to route which redirect URI you're going to use for your OpenID flow. And then secondly, then you have the targeting URI being passed to you inside the ID token as a new claim, as an LTI claim. And now because it's wrapped into the ID token, it's actually secure now because it's basically unclosed into the ID token JSON web token. So now that's how you get back your launch URI. So the rest of the data used to be passed to you as post parameters, basically key values. And now because it's an ID token, it's a JSON web token. We can use a JSON format, which allows some nesting and allows the payload to be a bit cleaner. So basically what used to be XYZ underscore blah, 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 now is just an XYZ object with the parameters. And now the parameters also don't have to be just strings. They can be actual JSON types. So the ID token you're getting, obviously it's an OpenID, so it's there to carry identity. So all the information about identity are going to use the claims defined by the OpenID specification. And the one that's maybe the less obvious is what used to be called user ID is now the sub claim. So that's basically where things would migrate. In one you have user ID, now it's at the sub, and the other claims mapping is pretty straightforward here. So that's for the OpenID, the identity-related claims. But with LTI, we use the ID token as a transport, and we put identity, but we put also all the LTI context in that same token. And so we've created, to enrich that token, we've created additional claims. And those claims always start with the same URL. And then, so that's how they start, right? So for example, you're going to have a resource link claim, which contains all the information about this resource link, including the resource link ID. You're going to have a roles claims that contains all the roles. Again, the roles have not changed. It's just that we just mandate the use of fully qualified role now in LTI 1.3. The roles haven't changed. The resource link ID, in most cases, would be the same. The context ID is the same thing. That's the new place where you find them into the ID token, but the values may not have changed actually. Yes, that's the bottom line. And so on for the different mapping here that we have. And so usually a platform don't have to change their IDs. So in that case, you would find your context ID is the same, user ID is the same, and so on. But some platforms may have had to change their ID in the re-implementation of LTI Advantage. In that case, there is a claim called the LTI 1.P1 claim that will contain the LTI 1.1 identifiers. So you will find that claim in the platform only if that platform had to change their identifiers. So in the example here, this platform here would have had to change the user ID and the context ID. So it's passing you in this claim the old identifiers so that you can do remapping dynamically on your side when you receive this payload. So that's for the data. So another thing that's very important also with LTI is obviously the great passback. And LTI 1.1 introduced a basic outcome, which has been the standards for passing a grade back, right? And the key for basic outcome is that an LTI message contains in the message all the information you need to be able to pass back a grade back. So that's the flow of basic outcome. The message contains a way to pass back a grade for that lunch. And that flow is preserved with the assignment and grade service from LTI Advantage, but assignment and grade service allows additional flows, but this flow is preserved. So in 1.1, in the message, you would have had the LIS outcome service URL, which is the endpoint to post the grade, and the LIS result source ID, which was the identifier, if you want, of a grade cell. So basically, for what was the score for, which user and activity, if you want. So that's what was in the message, and you would post some kind of XML, which is a value from 0 to 1 to that endpoint. So that was basic outcome LTI 1.1. And so now the same flow is available in LTI Advantage, but using assignment and grade service. So now what do you have in the message that lets you have the same flow? You have the sub, which is the user ID, so who is going to get the grade, and you have the line item URL, which is really the endpoint for that gradebook column. The line item is the gradebook column. So you have the line item URL, which identifies which gradebook column is associated with the activity that's being launched. And with that, you can just now post a score to that line item. You just need to add scores to the path at the end. And now you can post a JSON that comes for a given user for that line item. And just the point now is not a normalized score, it's points on points possible. And now this is secured using an access token. So that's how you migrate there. And so that means that the same column before and after can be, it's the same column. So right, it used to be passed as an outcome service URL and the result source ID. You migrate your tool, and now the same column now is passed to you as a line item URL, and you use the user ID to postgrade to it. So that's for basic outcome. And now we add a few other specifications that have made their way to become part of LTI Advantage. So we used to have content item specification, which has been renamed deep linking, and it's the same flow, but the data model. So we removed JSON LD because we thought that it was not really useful in the context of LTI. So it allowed us to make the JSON a little bit more compact and simplified. So the format is a little bit simpler. And because deep linking is a UI flow, then it's using the new LTI 1.3 mechanics for the launch. And the membership service had the same treatment. So basically, we removed JSON LD, simplified it a little bit, and it's been renamed to names and roles provisioning service. And those two now have been included into the LTI Advantage pack. So also another thing that changed a fair bit from LTI 1.1 is how you identify your relationship. So in LTI 1.1, it used to be most of the time the tool would give you a key and a secret. So it was tool originating. And but with LTI Advantage, it's platform originating. The platform is going to issue you an identifiers for a deployment. And this the identifier for the deployment is made of three things. The issuer, which identifies the platform at large, a client ID, which identifies your client inside that platform, and the deployment ID, which identifies a deployment of that client. And it's possible in the context of multi-tenant that a given client can be deployed in multiple, for example, department or organization. So each one will have a different deployment ID. So the key here is that it used to be a tool give a key, but now it's more that the platform tells you an identifier for a given deployment of your tool. And so that was basically in 1.1, you would give a key and you could set it up in different courses, the same key. So there was no problem with that. But with LTI 1.3, now, if you deploy at the course level, then it's going to be made 2 deployment, and you're going to have 2 different deployment identifiers. And it's going to be up to you to issue on first launch to prompt the user to do rebinding to the proper, we'll call it an account that's matching this deployment. And it's going to be one-time bindings that you need to do. And there is one thing in the LTI P1 claims that some platform may support is to pass you the old key and sign with the old secret. And what that would allow you to do is that rather than to prompt the user to say, where does this deployment ID belongs to which account, you would get this information to automatically rewire to the same account that you used to have with this key and secret. And so that's basically all what I've said. That is more from a specification viewpoint. And obviously, the migration is going to be different by platform, how you approach it. And so this is little table here. I'm not going to go into too much details because I want to let the platforms actually do this, explain those. But some criteria about how different it can be. Do you do an in-place update when you're updating an LTI? When you're updating to LTI Advantage, that means do you update your tool, or do you create a new tool aside and migrate to that new tool? That's one different approach that exists between platform. Another one is that do you migrate everything at once, or can you do it step by step? Can you migrate one course to another course and migrate everything? Did some IDs change? So do you need to look at the LTI 1P1 claim and be aware that some IDs have shifted? And do you support the account migration, the one about the consumer, passing you the old consumer key? Is there a way to revert back to 1.1 if you wanted to? And is dynamic registration going to be can be used to help you update? And but we've not talked about dynamic registration, but I think it can be an interesting bit to even help the migration in the future. So with all that, I think we're going to go just in this alphabetical order, and we can go into platform. So let's see what they have to say. So Eric, all yours.
There we go. Hi, Eric Preston with Blackboard. I'll go through this pretty quickly. In Blackboard, we rely on domain matching, which is in the spec, it's in the implementation guide, for deciding or for determining which LTI tool is been configured to use for that launch. And the reason for that, the most common reason for that is when you're importing an archive such as a common cartridge that has LTI links, we don't know which tool, which configured tool to use without matching the fully qualified domain. Because of that, we only allow one tool per fully qualified domain, because if we had two tools, we wouldn't know which one to use. And also because of that, we can't support both 1.1 and 1.3 or LTI Advantage at the same time, because they're two different launches. They have different payloads, and we wouldn't know which payload to generate for those launches. And so the way we handle migration is, if you've got an LTI 1.1 tool configured and it's got a domain, that's the fully qualified domain. We do an exact match. We don't support wildcards today. We may support wildcards in the future, but today we do an exact match on the fully qualified domain. And you would give a URL to your tool that's got that fully qualified domain, and then any other path parameters that you would want, or path information that you would want on that URL. And then you launch the tool and everything works. And this is just an example of what the old tool, let's say this is our old LTI 1.1 tool. This is what it looks like. You get a launch, and you get all these form parameters, as Claude discussed. With LTI 1.3, we've changed the registration model because we're now using asymmetric public-private key pairs. So we don't need to store keys and secrets inside an individual learn instance. So we've centralized the registration. And when you register a tool, again, you give it the fully qualified domain. You can have multiple of them that map to a single tool. You just can't have multiple tools that map to a single fully qualified domain. And again, you give it the tool redirect URI, which, as Claude mentioned, is not the same as the target redirect URI or the target launch URI. This is for the OpenID Connect flow in LTI 1.3. So this URL can be anything you want it to be for your new version of the tool. Once you have registered that with our central developer portal service, you then deploy it to Learn. And the way you deploy it is by just entering this client ID that we gave you. Remember, the client ID is part of the OpenID Connect spec, and it's passed as the odd field in the launch. Once you enter that client ID, we can detect if that fully qualified domain you registered with LTI 1.3 is already registered as an LTI 1.1 tool. And if it is, we offer the opportunity to migrate it. But we can't support both at the same time. And so it's an all or nothing kind of deal. If you have an LTI 1.1 tool at that fully qualified domain, we need to migrate all of those links, all of those placements, all of those links to the new LTI 1.3 tool if you want to keep those links still working for the new tool version, right? So this is up to a tool provider to decide how they want things to work. Once you've done that, we've preserved the old placements, we've preserved the old links, and we didn't have to re-enter any URLs. That old URL still works because it's the target link URI, right? It's not the actual launch URI. And then, so here's an example of, this is the old LTI 1.1 launch, and this is the new LTI 1.3 launch. And as Claude pointed out, the context ID is the same. We don't change the context ID because these are GUIDs from UUIDs that we generated in the past, and this is what we're still sending the same value. And our user ID hasn't changed. It's just in a different field. And so again, as Claude said, it's really the same. The data is the same, it's just in a different format. It's now in a nice, pretty JSON format. And that's it.
Thanks, Eric. I mean, is there any quick question for Blackboard for Eric now?
Yeah, sorry, just support from HMH. Just a quick question when you say it's all or nothing. I wonder, is that per tenant or is that globally for all of Learn? So if you have two
It's
different
per
customers
tenant.
of Learn per tenant.
It's per tenant. So it's still a manual configuration per Learn instance. So there may be 2,000 Learn instances around the globe. Each Learn instance would have to deploy the new LTI 1.3 tool to their institution. And so it's all or nothing for that instance.
Okay, there's going to be a lot of tool providers who've got multiple tools in the same domain. So if it was per tenant as well, that'd be totally unmanageable.
Perfect.
But we found it a very common use case to have multiple tools on the same domain.
Sure.
And they may not all be ready to migrate at the same time. So it could cause issues for customers.
Sure,
not to be
but the spec says that there is this concept of domain matching, and I don't know any other way for us to handle importing common cartridges other than matching the fully qualified domain. So
So some of the more complicated use cases might have more complicated migration paths, and you might have to work with, you know, your other vendor partners to figure those out. We are kind of covering the majority cases here, I think.
Yeah, because it would be possible to match the URLs
yeah.
in the common cartridge and the
yes,
provider
it would
URL.
be. Yes, it would be, and we don't support that today.
Yeah, let's move to Sheena and Brightspace, because we'll take more questions at the end, but we have a lot of platforms. I think we all want to hear from everybody today. Sheena, all yours.
Okay, here we go.
Oogie.
Hi everyone, my name is Sheena Allen. I'm a product manager for D2L, and we've taken a little bit of a different approach with our migration story for now. We're going to be iterating it. The first pass that we took was to implement an API. So that means that basically what we would allow is per link to be migrated. That allows both 1.1 and 1.3 tool setups to coexist at the same time. And the reason why we've done it this way is we've heard from our clients that they want to be able to test a 1.3 tool within a specific deployment or a specific course, whatever it may be. And they want to have that soak time. So the soak time could be anywhere from a semester to an entire year before they're willing to uplift the entire organization to use that 1.3. So what we have here is hopefully a live demo that works out well. Sorry, I'm also having docking station issues today, and my USBs keep failing. I believe everyone can see my screen still?
Yep. The API.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so within our Valence APIs, you can see that we have a new migration API to be able to do the upgrade. We've also deployed Sugi as both a 1.1 and a 1.3 tool within Brightspace. From a 1.3 perspective, this is a 1.3 deployment with all the specific configurations and the deployment, and also the deployment ID. From a 1.1 perspective, we have the tool as well with the key and the secret, and then also with the deployment to specific course offering. Under Manage External Learning Tools, this is within a course. I have both a 1.1 tool or a 1.1 link that I've set up, and I don't have that link yet underneath the LTI Advantage tab. So link IDs can be gathered either through through APIs, or we also have data sets. And basically what we would do is we would per LTI link, we would be able to upgrade it. So what I've gathered here is I've gathered the deployment ID that I've shown you through the deployment of that 1.3 tool, as well as the tool provider. And I'm going to submit this and see that it was successful. Now, when I come back to the LTI 1.1, we can see that it's no longer there. And when I go to the LTI Advantage side, I can see that it's now on the LTI Advantage, so it's attached to that 1.3 tool. And as I open up the claims, we can see that the claims have been updated. And at the very bottom, we also include the migration claim. The one thing that does change for us is the tool consumer instance grid. So we did include that within the claim itself.
And nice that you include. So you see here in action also the old consumer key signed with the old secret. So if you receive that on your side, on your tool side, you could do an automatic rebinding because you from the deployment ID to this old consumer key. And I think there is a plan to make that available in the UI also, the link migration.
Yes, so we're still working through with our different clients on what the best behavior is to be. We think it's probably going to be from the deployment itself.
Undocked.
I will work with my IT team on my document. Yes, we do. It is going to come into the UI. It's going to be probably from the deployment of the 1.3 so that we can still allow them to coexist. And we're still continuing to work through that design and research with our mutual clients.
All right. Any question for Sheena? Thanks. Next in line, Carl.
All right. So we were going to have one of our engineers do this, and he didn't realize he had a conflict. So I'm stepping in to help. So we took an approach similar to Blackboard, and we do domain matching. And I'm just going to share and just kind of do a little bit of step through of what we support. So on Canvas, we do have capabilities of setting up tool configurations at the global level and at all the account levels. And so it's close to what Blackboard does, but we also do domain matching. And so based on, for example, like this tool right here, we look for what's in this field right here. So if I have an existing LTI 1.1 tool in my course, so if I'm looking at my course and I have a tool that's here and that's LTI 1.1, and then all of a sudden a new tool becomes available and deployed and has that same domain in the domain field, then we will prefer or prioritize that tool configuration over the 1.1 tool configuration for future launches. And for links that are imported through Common Cartridge or that are already existing, we will do just in time. We'll add the right URLs that are needed for the services and add the line items and the associated data that's needed for there. And it also allows for a school or somebody that's testing a tool to revert back by just simply removing the LTI 1.3 tool, and then Canvas will just go back to what it was doing before. The one caveat that just needs to be mentioned here is that things like the course navigation links, in this case, when you're migrating and you have two tools that exist, you're going to see two, if they support course navigation placements, you're going to see both of those there, and those necessarily aren't going to work based off domain. It's mostly for the links that are embedded within the content places of the course. But that's pretty much a high level overview of what Canvas does.
You would just remove the placement in that case from you just need to tidy up.
You can remove the placement or just go through your testing, and then when you're ready, just remove the LTI 1.1 configuration and you're off and running.
All right. To make it sound easy. Any question?
I wish it was that easy.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, that's good. That's good. I can go with Moodle then next. I come back to me and so escape here from that. So Moodle here. I think remove the zoom bar. Okay. So Oops, that's not the one here. So I'm gonna log out here. So what we've seen so far from the previous platform is what I would call you deploy LTI Advantage as another tool, and then you migrate one way or another, either by domain matching or by explicit link migration. But I think the next two platform, I think, goes into more the in-place update, where you take an existing tool and you change its configuration to be a LTI Advantage. So it would be a Moodle and Sakai. So, and here I'm going to take a tool here that's configured as 1.1. And you see it's an LTI OAuth signature 1.1 verified. Then you're going to find your basic outcome data. So the LIS result, actually, you see it here, the LIS result source ID that was passed as a parameter, the outcome service URL that allows you to return a grade for that link, or OAuth 1.0 signed. So that's your LTI 1.1 typical implementation. So if you log out now, the tool just called and says, well, we're ready to support LTI Advantage. So they passed to us all the long set of URLs, and we are going to go into the site administration in Moodle, and you're going to pick that tool, which is in 1.1, and you're going to say, well, now I'm going to make it 1.3. And you would go around here, and that's what I mean by in place. You would go and say, oh, now it's 1.3. So you just toggle it to 1.3. And you see, it's all pre-filled here. There is no magic. It's just I've done it in the past. So this remembers this, which also shows you that you can move from one to another very easily. But it's going to be for the full site, right? It's not on a per course basis, but you can toggle back if you want because it remembers the old settings anyway. So here I did the previous LTI 1.3 registration. So basically, I would have to enter the key set URL, the init login, the redirect URIs, and I would have to make sure my service is available and so on. And I would save that. And then now this tool would have been configured. And now this would have generated a client ID and all of this kind of information that I would have had to put into my tool definition on the tool side, but it's already all set. And now if I would go back to my tool and look at the very same link, then that very same link now is going to be a JSON web token, right? It's going to be LTI 1.3 now. So, and with so this is a full token, but a few pieces of information that were extracted from it. Now it's a custom line item URL, which replaces the basic outcome service URL to post a grade. And I have the actual user ID here somewhere, the sub. And so therefore now I can post a grade. And now to post a grade, it would be a REST call. So REST call again to the line item URL. For that current user, and then we pass the score and so on. But the mechanics is the same. See, in the payload, I'm going to post to the exact same gradebook column, and I could get the existing grades from that gradebook column, but now using the LTI 1.3 mechanics. So it's an in-place update, but you still have to do all this setup. So this is where I'm going to slightly introduce and still a bit of thunder from Chuck. Sorry. Because he gave me the idea. Well, I think he nudged me to do something about it. So there is work in progress in Moodle to actually, if I go back in here, if this works, because this is my learning in a little Docker locally, so it's sometimes not really responsive. So if here I want to register a tool, I put the registration URL and I say add LTI Advantage. And that's not release code. What you're seeing here is work in progress. And you would go and add LTI Advantage. And this would detect that the domain you're trying to update, there is already an installed tool. So it's going to ask you, do you want to register as a new tool aside under the same domain? It's not really advisable, but you could do it. But it also, or do you want to update the old one, which is LTI 1.0? with this information, and you say, yes, I want to update, and that's running in another box, in another machine. So I don't know if it's going to respond. Maybe not. Sometimes it hangs. But anyway, if it would update, it would just basically take all this information from LTI 1.3. Oops, sorry. Up. It frees sometimes for 20 seconds. So but so it would show you that. And what I've added also is that I've added the old key and secret from 1.1, the same with that we've seen before, but now as part of the so it's right here. So you see it got the information, but I've added the old key and secret from 1.1, which allows at registration time to rewire the tool to the old account because it's passing back the old contract. And so now if I go back in here and close that, so that's dynamic registration that's happening here. And if you've not heard about dynamic registration, it's just a reuse of the OpenID discovery and connect specification tailored for LTI to exchange all the LTI 1.3 bits automatically between the two systems. And so now if I close this one, this tool here has been updated now to be LTI 1.3. So with all this information, and so it's ready ready to use. But that's use of dynamic registration for upgrade. It's not out there yet, but that's the Moodle side of the story. If there is any question. All right, so we're gonna bounce to Chuck and Sakai.
Okay, I should be sharing my screen. No screen share would be, that I do would make any sense if I'm not also showing VI in some window somewhere. So there's all, you can assume that if I'm doing it, there's going to be VI involved. So let's start with Sakai. So if I go in and I take a look at the external tools, the first thing to tell you about Sakai is the only LMS in this demo that doesn't do domain matching, or maybe D2L doesn't do domain matching. I'm a computer science professor, so our LTI tools are third normal form, which means that LTI links point to LTI tools. And you can see that this LTI tool has 7 uses because it's just counting up the links. And so we don't do domain matching on launch, but we do domain matching on content item import, right? And so that's kind of, you got to decide, right? Are you going to do content item link matching on import or link matching at launch? And so we decided to do link matching on import, and link matching domain name lookup can go wrong on import. And so we have this little transfer thing that allows you to take a tool and have all 7 links get sent to some other tool. So I could take this tool's links and point them at that tool if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that. So and so that helps understand how it is that I'm able to do what I'm able to do, and that is that we got foreign key connections between all these things in Sakai, and so it's pretty easy for me to change things. So if I take a look at this installed tool, the first thing you'll notice is that like Claude, I have used LTI Advantage auto configuration, and LTI Advantage is just an extension of a normal tool. So I have one table that's called LTI tools, and it's got a key in it, it's got a secret in it, and it's got all the checkboxes, and it's got the LTI stuff, and it's got this little button. If all of the data, just like in Claude's case, is fully supported, I can just go back and forth, and nothing is really changing except the tool entry. So I can go back and I can go forth. So let me leave it as it sits and then go into a course and launch. So this is a thing I placed with content item. I've also got it in Sakai where it seamlessly switches from content item to deep link if it's doing that. And so you can place a tool with content item and then launch the tool with LTI 1.3. You can place a tool with deep link and then launch it with 1.1. It just looks at each launch what it's supposed to do. So this is a classic, it's a classic LTI 1 launch. The person's name is admin because it's one of our legacy accounts. It doesn't have a big long GUID. User ID is admin. So that's just a thing. And so it runs. And then because this is all set up, I can simply change this and then tell it to launch LTI 1.3 somewhere in here. Everyone else's screen is prettier than me, just because I'm terrible at UI. So let's go back to Chuck's course and let's do a launch. And this is now an LTI 1.3 launch, but the important part of this that we're talking about is that it's a big long Java web token, and somewhere in here is the, there we go. Somewhere in here is the claim, right? And you've seen this, you saw this in Desire to Learn's demo, the old admin, the old consumer key, and then a signature that proves that you actually have the secret. It's as long as the database, as long as the LMS knows it, as long as the LMS knows what's going on, it's pretty easy to generate this. We got lots of open source code that generates it. But the other thing you'll notice that's a little bit different is that I actually took this opportunity to send real subjects. A lot of folks just send their old primary key as the subject. And so I actually made a subject kind of hopefully someday multi-tenancy. I don't know why I did this, but this is one thing that Sakai does differently, because in a sense, the logical key of this user in the outside system needs to be the subject if it's an LTI 1.3, and it needs to be the user ID if it is 1.1. And so if you look at my data model, if you look at my user data model here, let's get right here /LTI user, this is my tool. You see that I've got user key, which is the logical key. I have a SHA-256 trick for uniqueness, so that I don't have too long of things for my uniqueness constraint, and a subject key. And basically what I have is a uniqueness clause that says, you know, if the key ID is the issuer and tenant and all that stuff. And so I basically make the user and subject as, in a sense, two shared logical keys. And all I have to do when I'm getting I like, oh, I've got a user, oh, and the subject is blank. Oh, and I've got a valid signature. Oh, well, I'm just going to then add the subject in the right place in that user. And that's why now, after I've migrated, I can go back because I have two logical keys in my tool. And so I can now go back and go right back to LTI 1.1 by just going here, and then every link in a millisecond. Every link is going to be a 1.1 link. And so I just go back and forth, just like Moodle, I go back and forth because in my tool, I have multiple logical keys. And so now I'm running a LTI 1.1 and it works. And so so for me, I see a lot of different ways that LMSs do it. I think that it's great and it's challenging and it's hard, and depending on how LMSs do it. The key message here is that tools have to do it, right? The LMS, we can't complain about the LMSs because they each have different challenges to solve. And so I'll stop here. I think, yeah, I said everything I wanted. So I'll stop here. I think that if we were going into more detail, we should talk about the right way for tools to build all of this code so that they can handle all of the variations of the LMSs. And so you saw variations of LMSs. None of those variations are right or wrong, right? And so I think it's incumbent upon tools to properly implement this so that you can handle all of the variations. And one thing you noticed is you saw Sugi used in a whole bunch of those things. And I showed you the Sugi data model that makes it so that I can talk with all these folks, right? And so I think that the key is that, and here's perhaps the most important thing is that we're not going to get two shots at this tool, people. We are not going to get two chances at this, because once in my system, I've created if I don't have a migration, I create a whole new user. And then it's harder to bring all of the user records for two users that I've got no connection between. It's really easy to have a primary key in the tool and have two logical keys, and it just works, and I can go back and forth. The problem is if I run with an LTI 1 for a while, and then I run with an LTI 1.3 with no migration for a while, now I've got a year of history with this one user and a year of history with this different user, and now I get a migration 2 years later. That's not good. And so it's scary to me if tools can't handle this claim. And so you've seen this mostly from a LMS perspective, but the real perspective that's important is a tools perspective. And I'll stop and let you have it back, Claude. Unmute. Unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, there used to be a presentation about the institution viewpoint of that. And it's very important that migration is more than just the technical side of it. There is a process, a business process to it. But one of the key elements is that as an institution, it's important to understand that the platforms do support migration. There is the way to migrate and keep your data. And therefore, as a tool, it's important to be able to say, yes, I will be able to migrate. And I understand the migration, I understand the different flavor, but they're all around the same idea. So with this a bit of a table here, as long as you understand the LTI 1P1 claim, which may or may not be used. So if it's not in there, same data. If it's there, then you need to remember that you have a remapping. So you need to build for the case for the general cases. But it's important to offer a solution where you can migrate your courses and you don't mandate or ask, or surely do not say that the LTI 1.3 forces you to migrate, because there is nothing in here that forces you to rebuild things. There is a way to migrate in place. So, but is there any questions for the platforms out here on the specification themselves? Is there something on the chat? Don't see anything.
So this is an ad for tools, right? I put this in the chat. If tools don't do this right, you're going to look really, really, really bad in 2 years, because you see, even though we do different ways of doing it, the claim is the same. And as a tool, if you don't handle the claim, you're going to look really foolish, and you're going to have a bunch of clients that are yelling at you to unify completely disparate sets of user data. And it's going to be 2 years from now if you don't do it right away. So if I was a tool writer, I would go figure out my data model, and then I would fix the data model, and I would test with several of these, and it should be really easy to test. I mean, it's really an easy claim to get. Getting your data model right in a tool is the key. But the LMSs are going to look okay, right? And all those 10 years of lost data in Piazza, because they didn't do this, there's going to be some grumpiness out there. And you can't just say, because like there's reasons why, like Canvas did what they're doing. They don't send you their primary key. Moodle does send you their primary key. Sakai doesn't send its primary key, right? I mean, but there's reasons for all those things that we're doing the best we can and giving.
Yeah, and you don't care what the key means on your side.
Yeah,
what you care is what it is.
And
yeah,
you got to do it.
Yeah, another little thing that's also found, it's a bit of a side effect, but it could be useful also, is that remember the launch URL? Well, it's not launch 2 anymore. So that means your old endpoint can still be 1.1, and you can actually build a full set of new endpoints that takes the 1.3 traffic, but you don't have to repurpose your old endpoint. It takes your, you can really build an aside dependency and just look at the launch URL to understand where you were supposed to go before, and then do whatever you need to do. But you can really build it aside, and you still get the old link, because of the beauty of this is that it's new launch URLs that are declared in addition to the old ones, so they don't replace it.
I think you guys are talking a lot about the sort of the institutional side, and I've been nodding my head with my camera off, but this is something we kind of really drive home, that tools need to get this right. LMSs are doing slightly different, but it's working, right? Make tools do it properly, because it's not on the LMS at this point. The LMSs have things there that will work, and the tools need to exercise those and implement them. Because what we're finding is that tool market is much more competitive. As easy it is to plug in a new tool, we can just go find another tool that does the same thing better. Right? If it's a textbook publisher or materials, and that's what our designers, they do not want to go into a course and rebuild all their content. They're just going to go out and say, well, if I got to do that anyway, why don't I just find something new? Okay, so there is a competitive advantage to this as well, and so the upgrade process is part of your features. So there's a lot of folks that are on these things and make it work well, right? That's on you guys. to fix anything you had with 1.1 and to make the upgrade process easy.
Hey, Claude, one thing we ought to, I don't know how far we publicize it, but your little grid that you just gathered in the last couple of weeks is tremendous. I think that you need to add one thing, and that is a column that says, is there a difference between user ID and subject? And that's
well, actually, that was
Oh.
here. Some IDs change.
Oh, okay.
And so you see,
you're way ahead of me, Claude. Never mind. I don't have a copy of that. I keep wanting to screenshot it so I get my copy.
Yeah, I just did it for that, but I think we need to find a way to, I think it's a good criteria because I think there is migrations, it's the same bricks in the specification. There are not that many, you know, it's mostly the LTI 1.3 claim. And then understand the process, right? In this platform, I deploy a new tool and I move to it. In here, I do it in place. And that actually has, it's more like on the documentation and how you help your customers use the migration to understand how it works in the LMS is important for a tool. But the key data element, I think, is in this LTI 1.3 claim to transfer the old ID. And so keep as a tool the ability to have two identifiers. And yes, as Chuck pointed out, don't erase one to replace by the other. Just introduce another one so that you can give both channels.
I would say that column, that third column is the most important column for tools to understand, because that tells you it's a map of who you have to test with, right? If you just decide, oh, I'll do this with Moodle, and then you update your tool and Moodle doesn't change the identifier between 1.1 and 1.3, and you walk into a Canvas or a Sakai that changes the identifier, you'll be like, you're broke, man. I just assumed that number was always the same. And the answer is Moodle might not always make it be the same, right? But Sakai and Canvas change it. And it had to do, I think, with, you know, who had sort of internal multi-tenant structures for their users. If their IDs are global enough, they don't have to change this. But I think that's a key for tools, is to make sure to look down that column 3 and test with at least one that says yes and one that says no. And I think that's the single most important thing.
Chuck, I think just between you and Claude talking to us right now, you know, I think we should have a, you know, maybe another roundtable or something like this that's focusing on the tools migration paths and not just the platforms. We have emphasized the platforms and the kind of UIs and their overall flow, but yeah, a tool focused one would probably be a good roundtable coming up.
Yeah, I think part of why we're talking about this right now, Bracken, is that, you know, it was like less than a month ago where we did, maybe a month and a half, where we're like, I don't think anybody except Sakai and Moodle did that. And then everyone said, oh no, we all did it. And so it's like, whoa, we all did it. So that's what turns into this picture. But now that we realize that everybody that matters is doing it, then I agree with you, Bracken, that now we got to say, see tools, now it's time to cope with it.
Yeah, well, I think that was the idea. This showing the platforms is for the tools. Maybe showing the tools is for the platforms, but for the tools, it's important to understand the landscape of what they're looking at and see, okay, there is variation, but it's not radically different from one to another. As long as you prepare for a little bit of data shift and you're aware of that and you support that, then you're in good shape. All right. Any last minute question? All right, so maybe I can do just a 5-minute teaser on the dynamic registration, since it was on the agenda and we have 5 minutes. So, and again, we had a roundtable last Tuesday about that, so you can have a look at it. But
and I'll post that link in chat again, just so people can hop over to that as well.
Yeah, and I'll share this slide also. You know, maybe I can share it right now. All right, so you can have that table. I probably want to put it somewhere else, but in the meantime, it's there. All right. Yeah, so dynamic registration. So actually, I have a slide. I won't go through it again too much, but the idea of dynamic registration, you've seen it, is that we're setting up an LTI tool can be a lot of back and forth data between two systems. And okay, I'm going to put this one here. Sorry, I have my zoom bar in the way all the time. All right, so actually here. And so the idea is that when you want to deploy a tool, you just now the tool is going to give you a URL, and this URL is for you alone, and it's passed to the institution admin, and they're gonna put the value there. And when you say add LTI Advantage, it's gonna issue a request. So you see, this is just a new, this is intermediary step, but anyway, so this is going to send to the tool the endpoint to get the platform configuration, and actually it's in here to get the, so this in this first leg, the tool gives the URL. This URL is passed back by the platform to the tool with the configuration endpoint and a registration token, which allows the platform to ask to the tool. Well, I'm gonna use another. Sorry, I'm gonna use this system because the other one is not responding. All right, in here, site administration. So again, as a tool, I give you my URL. Say, okay, I'm going to register you. I paste it in here. You say add LTI Advantage. And so what happened is that the tool, the platform opens an iframe, opens this URL that the tool gave, and add to this URL the URL to get the platform configuration and the registration token. The tool is gonna just use this URL to get the actual platform configuration. So all the information the OpenID data that is needed to set up the platform on the tool side is passed here. In addition, it's also passing somewhere here the actual registration endpoint. So this registration endpoint now is that as a tool, I got the platform information, I got the registration endpoint. So now I can post to the tool a request to register my client, my tool. So for that, I'm going to use the token I got, and I'm going to create a tool definition. And this tool definition is based on the OpenID dynamic registration data. So it's going to contain all the OpenID related data that I need to express as a OpenID client. But it's also enriched with the LTI configuration of that tool, which specifically which custom parameters I want, but very importantly, which messages I support. And for example, here, I want to say I support LTI deep linking request. So I'm going to post that, again, to the platform, to the registration URL, and using the token as an access token. And the platform, if it accepts my request, is going to bounce me back the actual registration of my client, enriched with the generated client ID for this registration. And because LTI, it doesn't support multiple deployment for a given client ID, Moodle doesn't support multiple registration deployment for a given client ID. It's also going to give you the LTI deployment ID in the response. And now from a tool perspective, you got the platform data, you send the registration to the platform has given you the client ID, and in this case, the LTI deployment ID. So everything is set on both sides, and you're done. So you can close, and close is done through a Windows post message back to the parent frame to say it's complete. And now the tool here is just there and ready to be reviewed and activated by the platform. And that's something that is available also in Sakai. Same idea, same mechanics. And actually, we did some interrupt tests. And so that's a way to really simplify the deployment of LTI Advantage tool. And it somewhat relates to upgrade, because if it's easier to create a registration for a tool, then you have it's easy to set up your LTI 1.3 tool, then you can migrate to it. But so that's dynamic registration. And you can look at the roundtable for many more demos on that specification.
All right, any other questions? With a minute left. Nicely done, Claude, and everyone. So thanks, Claude, Eric, Sheena, Carl, Chuck. I think that was everyone. Appreciate you demonstrating what that migration looks like from your various platform perspectives. Again, this recording we'll make available. And I think we'll try and move it over to the YouTube channel where we have the other LTI roundtable recordings. I think this would fit nicely there and be a good resource to have longer term than just the 90-day that this quarterly meeting sessions will be available. So thank you.
And just to add that there will be other roundtables on migrations where we'll give more time for the platform. I'm thinking here D2L and Brightspace and Canvas to do more demos and go more in details. And we have previous recording on Sakai and Blackboard that you can have a look at, and previous roundtable around migration also if you want to see more demos. So have a look at those too.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.